Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll be discussing about the VPC endpoint policies. Now at a high level overview, whenever you go ahead and create a VPC endpoint, let's assume a gateway endpoint, then you can attach an endpoint policy to it that controls the access to the services that you are connecting to. For example, let's say that you have a VPC endpoint over here and the traffic to the S3 service from the EC2 instance is directed from here. Now within the S3, there are two buckets that are available. You have a demo bucket and you have a KP Labs bucket. Now by default, the EC2 instance will be able to communicate with both of the buckets considering that it has its associated proper IAM role. However, as an additional measure at a VPC endpoint level also, you can go ahead and control the traffic to a specific S3 bucket. So for example, you have an endpoint policy which says allow connection to demo bucket. So if this endpoint policy is associated, then even though the EC2 instance has a full S3 permission, it will only be able to communicate to the demo bucket. It will not be able to communicate to the KP Labs bucket, considering that the traffic is flowing through the VPC endpoint. And this is the basic idea behind the VPC endpoint policies. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and try this out practically to understand it in a better way. Now currently we have a gateway endpoint based on the S3 service that is available. Now if you look into the policy over here, by default the endpoint policy allows all the connection to all the resources. So this is one of the default policies. However, if we need, we can go ahead and customize it as well. So for today's demo, for the region where our endpoint is created, which is US West 2, I have two S3 buckets, and based on these two S3 buckets, we'll go ahead and design our endpoint policies. So before we go ahead and start to write our endpoint policies, from our private EC2 instance, let's go ahead and verify the connection to both of these S3 buckets. Now first we'll go ahead and do a AWS S3 LS on one of the buckets here. Let's do an enter. And as expected, we are able to see the results. And in a similar way, we'll go ahead and connect to another S3 bucket within the same region. Let's press enter and we are able to see the content. So basically both of these S3 buckets has a similar file. Now let's go ahead and design a policy where the VPC endpoint will only allow connection to the second bucket from here, which is temp endpoint US West 2. It should not allow connection to any other S3 buckets. So now from the endpoint, let's go ahead and edit the policy. Now there are multiple ways in which you can create a policy. One of the easiest way is to use a policy creation tool. So let's go ahead and open this up. And within the policy creation tool, you can go ahead and easily select the basic context and the policy will be created for you. So the policy type would be the VPC endpoint. Principal, let's just put it as star. Now within the AWS service, we'll just use S3. Within the actions, we'll just use all actions, and then you have to specify the ARN. Now ARN, you can either directly write it or you can even get it from the S3 console. So if I'll go to properties, you'll basically can get the ARN. Let me paste the ARN. And once I add the statement, we can quickly generate the policy. So this is the policy that is created. Let me copy this up. And within the policy, I'll select custom and let's paste our policy here. So based on this policy, only the connection to this S3 bucket would be allowed. Let's try it out. So I'll just quickly do a save. And as expected, now we see you have a custom policy. Now from our private EC2 instance, if we connect to the temp endpoint US West 2, so this is the S3 bucket that is allowed within the endpoint policy. It is working perfectly well. If we try to connect to temp endpoint 2, so this is our second S3 bucket, and immediately here you see you are getting a access denied on the operations associated with this S3 bucket. Great. So I hope at a high level overview you understood the importance of the VPC endpoint policies, and this allows great number of customization and the access control based on the requirement for your organization. Now, a few important things that you should know when we discuss about the policy decision specifically at a VPC endpoint based architecture. First important policy based decision comes from the IAM rule, which is associated with the EC2 instance, or if you have an access secret key, it is associated with a policy for those access secret key. So this is the first step. So only after the EC2 instance is authorized, then the decision can be made. Then the next important decision which can be allowed or denied is at a gateway VPC endpoint level. So we already have seen on how we can go ahead and create a resource level policy at a VPC endpoint level. And the third place where the policy decision can allow or can deny is at the S3 level. So you can go ahead and create a S3 bucket which can also deny the connection. So whenever you are going ahead and implementing a VPC endpoint based architecture and due to some reason you are getting access denied, then these are the three primary places that you need to look into as part of the troubleshooting step. That's great. So with this, we'll conclude today's video.